So let's talk politics. It's election season, and I wanted to approach this thing again from the idea of being a Christian and trying to figure this thing out. I did the last video, and I suppose this video could be a continuation of that thought process. And in the last video, I basically made the claim that you couldn't vote Democrat if you're a Christian. And what I mean by that, just quickly again, is this: I'm not saying um, you're sinning necessarily, but what I'm saying is that you uh, you're 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 aligning yourself um, with the devil, basically. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but that's the way I see it. And so I wanted to talk about, morality and politics and why I could say something like that. I mean, first of all, let me just say this too. The truth is that we shouldn't define ourselves by any political party. We're a Christian first, and we're king. We're a part of Christ's kingdom and not a part of this world to the point where we should be in any sort of affiliation with a political party other than the fact that we find it necessary to affect our culture. That's the reason why I'm compelled to deal with politics as a Christian. Why I think it's necessary. Um, that being said, I want to focus on this idea of alignment. You know, it's more like affiliation. You affiliate yourself with Christ. You're taking as you're a Christian, you're taking on the name of Christ, the reputation of Christ, and so everything that you do is looked at through this lens. Now we're not perfect, so that's and I'm not sitting in judgment. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that um, I am trying to discern, right? That's what I'm trying to do is discern. So I did, as I said, talk harshly. I guess. I mean, I tried to be as accommodating as possible in regards to you know getting my opinion out, and I want to try to, I guess, flesh that out a little bit more. So let me first explain that my best friend came to me and gave me. So he saw the video and he said, "Look, I saw the video and you're confused about why Christians could vote Democrat, and so let me give you a reason." And the reason he gave, I will be perfectly honest and say, is a very good one. So what he said was he knows two people very well that work for orphanage, boys' home, or children's home type place, right? Under Obama and the Democrats, they were doing really well. And Trump and the Republicans have cut their funding, and now orphanages and homes are closing. So it's a good point because it hits a lot of different things in regards to this concept of morality, right? Because and where politics intersects. Because I could easily see a Christian arguing, "Hey, this is the Lord's work, and the Republicans are against it." Okay, I'm not going to sit there and say that that's not a valid point. What I'm going to say, though, is that there's a broader picture, and that in any situation, when it comes to politics, first of all, you need to understand that the political realm affects us all. This is why us Christians aren't immune from it. And this is a perfect example of that very fact. We are not immune from the touch, the effect of political machinations. I mean, political policy affects us all. And so the idea that, remember, separation of church and state isn't to keep the church out of the state, is to keep the state out of the church. That's what it's for. And so we don't check our Christianity at the voting booth. So it has to affect our morality. And in saying that, giving this sort of answer, it's a tacit admission that morality is affected by politics. So politicians have this power. And so it's on that I think the broader discussion needs to be had here. So uh you know, we live in a world. I want to get in regards to the biblical mindset here. If I'm talking to Christians, we believe the world is the devil's world. He runs this world, and it's not as if everything's open for us to see. We live in a world of deception. Paul says to us not to be conformed to this world, but to renew our minds. So there's this idea of discernment. I mentioned that before. The devil is into deception. You know, he is the first liar, the father of liars, a liar from the beginning. That's what the Bible says, right? He comes as an angel of light. Now, from someone who's conservative, obviously that sounds like I'm placing that on the Democrats. And so, to be fair, I am. But it could also apply to the Republicans. So let me first say, as I mentioned before, we're not to be affiliated in that way. I'm not promoting the Republican Party. Either, my opinion is this: either you vote Republican if you can morally stand it, or you don't vote at all. That would be my position, because I don't think the Democrat Party, the Democrat platform, has ever or does stand for anything close to Christian values. In fact, I'm going to attempt to make the case that they're absolutely anti-Christ. That's really what I'm going to sort of say. So, the way I want to approach this, Trump, as an example, is not, forget his negativity. I agree that's a problem, okay? But place that aside for a second, because in other words, I'm not claiming you should vote for Trump. If you can't find, you can vote for him, then you shouldn't vote. That doesn't have any bearing on whether you can vote Democrat. But one of the things that he says that is true is that the media is fake news. The media gave a Pulitzer Prize to the guy who was lying about Stalin when he was murdering people. This idea that the media is this place where we, as the fellow little citizens, can go to get all the information, or that they're this watchdog that will go after our elected representatives and give us the truth and call them to task, is a complete lie. It is a complete lie. All of the big media corporations, all of the social media giants, all promote the left. They all do. And you know this because Black Lives Matter was promoted by all of these places. There was no talk, there was no discussion, there was no diversity in regards to this. Everywhere you went on social media, they were pushing Black Lives Matter. They're all of one accord. This is just a fact. They pretty much get their marching orders from the AP, Reuters, and the New York Times. And they all say the same thing. You can argue Fox News is not like that. Maybe now One America News, I don't know who owns them. But even Fox News, as an example, does the same agenda. The only difference is what they do is they just approach it from the right. So they're still giving you the same content, though. All they're doing is just giving you the other side of it, the other opinion. Um, 4 companies own all the media, and what I want to explain by this is to say that if the devil owns the world, and the 4 richest companies own the media, and the media promotes the Democrats, that is a logical step-by-step progression for you to which should be a clue right there, that the Democrat Party is the party that's promoted by the world, right? The devil runs the world, and the media is a worldly entity that is in lockstep. I mean, this is, to me, it's not even a question that this is true. I just don't think most people pay enough attention to it. The reason the media does this is because the whole point is to manipulate us. The elites have been manipulating the populace since the beginning of time. It's how this works. When Jesus was confronting the Pharisees, he confronted the Pharisees because they were the ones that were creating this fake news at the time. They were saying, this is how you're supposed to live, but they weren't doing that themselves. Okay, they were hypocrites. There was no separation of church and state at the time, and so it gets confusing for us because we look back and we think of the Pharisees as these religious people, but the point, religion is just a tool that the people use. Governments have used this forever. Pharaoh was considered a god. Caesar was considered a god. I mean, this is the way that the world has worked. Until the Enlightenment, you don't really have this separation. I mean, even if you go into the European monarchs, they had this idea that they were chosen to be the monarch by God. They were God's chosen monarch. This is why you had this sort of family line monarchy thing going on. So you can't forget that religion was just a justification. It was using the divine as a justification for ruling over the affairs of men, having power over others. That's all it ever was. History has changed. Our society today is just a little bit different, right? The difference is that now we have a new religion. It's humanism. And that's the Democrats, right? They promote humanism. They promote the idea that pretty much you're your own God. It goes all the way back to Genesis, right? That was the enticement. It wasn't a fruit. I mean, that's ridiculous. It was what eating the fruit would offer, which was to be like God. That was the promise. So that means we get to make our own rules if we're like God. And that's why we have the problems that we have today. So, I mean, as a Christian, you can't be for that, just as a general rule, if that's true, right? I'm just trying to make a case here that the Democrats are this way. The Democrats run the educational system. And see, the educational system started out with religious intent. You can go to all these older universities, and you'll see that their original charters were exalting Jesus Christ. Now they're far from it, you know. I think YMCA used to be Young Men's Christian Association, and now it's Young Men's Club of America. And so you see how the country has become more and more secular. Some people think that that's the way that the country should be. That's an argument, and if you're on that side, then I'm not speaking to you, then your party is the Democrat Party. But if you're a Christian, then why would you align yourself with them? That's kind of what I'm saying. So if you look to the left and you look to the right, and you see secularists and humanists and atheists, and I just ask, what do you think this is a coincidence? The as broken as the church is, as hypocritical as the church is, it's not a coincidence that the right side of the political aisle is where you find most fundamental Christians. It's because that is the party that best matches. It's not perfect by any means, but it best matches the Christian, the biblical walk. It matches it better than the Democrats do. So, you know, I mentioned history in regards to manipulation, right? So we see what's going on today, and we have the racial problems that we have, and this isn't new, you know. Um, it's listen, the whole point of this, and this is a theme that's going to come up, is this idea of deception. Evil doesn't come to you and says they're evil. The first thing they do is lie, and they get you to move over, and then they may tell you another lie, and then they may tell you another lie, and then they'll get you to a point where then either once you realize either that you're so shamed that you can't go back, or they'll blackmail you. I mean, that's it's this carrot and stick thing where they're going to offer you the carrot, the best the world has to offer, but you have to give your soul. That's this whole Faustian deal, right? I mean, that's how this works. But the beginning of it is deception. So I'm not trying to be judgmental, because we live in a world that's deceiving us. So as an example, Black Lives Matter is a satanic organization, I would argue. They actually, I mean, the information's out now. They actually are spiritualist in a really non-Christian way, whatever you want to, however you want to term it, but it's old world religion to a certain extent. I mean, this is stuff that they've come out and said, some of their members. They're for the destruction of the nuclear family. They're against anything that's traditionally standard family-oriented stuff. They think that that's old school. They're against men. They're radical feminists. They're against the family. It's almost, you almost wonder why they're called Black Lives Matter, because they're almost, Black lives are irrelevant to the point. Like, their whole charter is basically anti-men, anti-family, anti-Christian. So, who promotes Black Lives Matter? Well, the Democrats promote Black Lives Matter. So again, there's another clue. And again, the point is that they would paint back Black Lives Matter as actually a good group that's trying to do good things, that's for justice reform. Okay. That's what they did during the slavery time, right? They tried to put a happy face on slavery. And when that didn't work, and the Republican Party was built to abolish slavery, and yes, that's what happened, as the Democrats were in control of the country, abolitionists created their own party. It was called the Republican Party. That's the party that we have today. The Democrat Party was created by Andrew Jackson, who was a racist. Racist against natives, racist against blacks. And it has not changed. It has not changed. They will lie to you and tell you there was some sort of switch that took place in the 50s and the 60s. That never happened. It just had to do with LBJ taking advantage of the fact that Barry Goldwater didn't vote with the Civil Rights Act passed by Republicans, not Democrats. Okay, see? The Democrats are not the friend of the black man and black woman. So again, we see this deception, right? And think about what happened after they lost the war. So they go. So the Republicans come to power, and they go to war. They plunge the country into war, and they're trying to do that now. By the way, I mean, if you haven't noticed that, they're trying to do that now. By the way, they want to plunge the country in a race war, just like the Civil War was. And when the Democrats lost that, they ended up creating the KKK, um, just like they've created the BLM and Antifa. Um, there is no new thing under the sun. You know that. Here's the deal. As a Christian, do you think the devil doesn't have a role in politics? And once you go, of course the devil has a role. He's doing something in politics. I think the fair thing to say is he's got both parties. I wouldn't argue that point. I would not argue that point. But if if there is some possibility for change, some crack through the darkness, where would it lie? And that's what we're trying to discover. The problem is that it couldn't be the Democrat Party. It just can't be based on the platform, based on their history, based on the present, based on their affiliations. It can't be the Democrat Party. So I talked about how BLM comes out and they're looking to the whole push on that is the idea of justice reform. But here's the thing, Trump's already doing justice reform. One of the things that what they're actually doing is they're just pinning all of the problems on the cops. Nobody, well, I don't want to say nobody, but most reasonable people realize that the justice system is broken. Perhaps it has some institutional racism in it. I'm not going to sit there and say that's not possible. I'm not going to say that it doesn't affect blacks more than it affects whites, because it certainly is against poor people. It certainly is supporting rich people over poor people, rich, connected people over poor people. It'll throw somebody that's poor in jail for a long time, and it'll let somebody who's rich off. We all see that, but tell me, how does defunding the police stop that from happening? It doesn't. You're not actually reforming the system. You're just getting rid of a component of the system. And I would argue that it's the worst component that you could possibly get rid of, because poor people also happen to live in high crime areas where cops are needed. So who's going to be hurt by this? And so, again, I mentioned Trump is going and pursuing justice reform. Meanwhile, the Democrats have brought us Joe Biden, who did the 94 crime bill, which has harmed black people in ridiculous ways and thrown them in jail for crimes they otherwise wouldn't be thrown in jail for periods of time they otherwise wouldn't be in jail for that long. And Kamala Harris, who has an abysmal record when she was the state attorney in California. So, again, you know, it's if you're going to vote, how could you, and you want justice reform, how could you vote for the left? And again, you go, well, Black Lives Matter wants, but no, that doesn't work, because I've already explained that. They're doing what they always do. And whose neighborhoods are they going after? And even if they go to places where they break in and destroy and steal, I mean, so as a Christian, how do you support that? How is that promoting any sort of civil right by stealing from somebody? How does that support that? And even, let's take it a step further. Isn't the whole policy platform for the Democrats the idea of stealing anyway, when it comes right down to it? The idea of going, well, you're poor, and so therefore somebody else has money, so elect me, I'll take their money, and don't worry, it'll make it back to you. No Christian would say that they have the right to take a gun and aim it at somebody and go, give me your money. No Christian would say that, right? How come some Christians go, it's okay if the government does it on their behalf? Because that's basically what taxation is. You go to the voting booth and you vote that your neighbor pays money to the government on the idea that you'll somehow get it, or your neighbors. I mean, or some Christians, and this is where it gets a little holy, where it's like, oh, don't worry, the poor, it's not for me, it's for the poor. This Robin Hood idea. Well, first of all, why is the government in the position of doing charitable works anyway? How is that biblical? Unless you're wanting a theocracy, nobody wants that. So the government is not supposed to be doing charity work. The Christian is supposed to be doing the charity work. Now, this gets into what's wrong with the church. The video isn't about that, but that's another problem that we've got. Our churches are these cults of personality where you've got these mega pastors who are building giant arenas and buying up property and flying around in jets instead of feeding the poor. So the Christian left has no problem seeing and pointing this issue out, and I stand with them when they do that. But how do you then justify it when the politicians do it? Because the politicians do the same thing. They fly around in jets, they get special treatment, they have mansions, everything that the televangelist mega pastor does. The politicians do the same thing. If you're going to get right down to it, at least the mega pastor is manipulating and cheating people by tricking them into actually them giving him or her their money. The government actually tricks other people to make them vote to take money from somebody else to give it to them. So if you want to get down to it, the politician is actually in a worse position, at least as far as that's concerned. Another way you could look at it is it's much worse for the evangelist or the TV evangelist, the typical mega pastor that comes to mind, because they're doing it in the name of God, which is never a good thing. And they'll have to answer to God for that. But that doesn't help us in regards to how we vote. And just because you look and you see all these rich people, whatever status they are, and you think they are wasting their money, they're not using their money correctly, it doesn't give us the right to steal their money. It doesn't give us the right to vote in somebody who's going to steal their money. It doesn't. Even if it goes to fund orphanages, because those orphanages ought to be paid for by the church. They just should be, and that's the way it should be. I'm not saying it's an easy fix. I'm just saying that it's the way it should be. In regards to this idea, so I started off talking about how the Democrats are supporting social programs better than the Republicans, and that example that I gave that my friend gave me. And the best world would be that the Republicans didn't do that and they somehow cut something else, which I'm sure could be done. So again, I'm not supporting the Republicans necessarily. But you cannot untie culture from the problems that we have in our society, like what our kids are going through, right? If you have a society in which you have a lot of orphans and kids that have to be taken out of their homes, it's because you've got bad family structures. Why would you vote for the Democrats who are supporting things like BLM, which are against family structure? Because if the family structure was fine, you wouldn't need the orphanages. You wouldn't need all the taxpayers going. I mean, that's not the best place for a kid anyway. The best place for a kid is in a stable home with a mother and a father. That's just the fact of life. Why would you support? And so, in regards to what affects culture, let's look at what the Democrats support. Let's look at what the Democrats promote. That affects our culture. So, again, I mentioned the university and the educational system. They're educating us in the idea that we come from monkeys. Evolution. They say it's a fact. They can't show it to you, but they say it's a fact. The ramifications of this theory, this scientific theory that gets taught in pop culture, it doesn't just stay in the science books. It's in everything. The ramifications are huge, because you're not going to tell me that all the violence that we're experiencing doesn't come from the fact that we see each other as animals. That life is nothing more than a chaotic accident. You teach our children this and then expect what? So, every problem is deep. Every issue leads to another issue, ties to another problem that we've got. And that can't, and that has to be part of the equation. What our culture has turned into in regards to how we're educating our children is part, and maybe the biggest part of our problem, and the Democrats wholly endorse it and support it. The Democrats also support Hollywood, which is absolutely disgusting. And it's getting more and more and more disgusting and depraved. Netflix has that show where they're sexualizing little girls. Netflix has been doing this. That they're sexualizing children at a time in which everybody's realizing how unbelievable the sexual exploitation of children has been in our society. This is a time when we're all seeing the truth. Who supports that? I'm not saying, listen, I'm not promoting Republicans, because there's been plenty of Republican people caught in this as well. I'm talking about the elites and their abuse on the poor and how they deceive us. And the Democrats are openly promoting the elites, promoted by the elites, promoted by the media, promoted by Hollywood. I talked about racism. I wasn't aware of this until not too long ago, but the first big hit for Hollywood was The Birth of a Nation, which was a KKK propaganda film that was shown in the White House by Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. So, they would say there's a swap that took place. So let me see, the Democrats and Hollywood were hooked together back when the KKK was around, that fomented racial angst. And Hollywood and the Democrats are hooked up together still when Antifa's around, and BLM, and promoting racial angst. folks, there's no new thing under the sun. They're liars. That's what I'm saying to you. They're liars. And if you're a Christian and you're voting for the liars, then that's not good. And I'm not trying to say that that you're. I'm not trying to come down on you. I'm trying to say if you watch this and you vote for the Democrats, I'm just asking you to consider what I'm saying. And wouldn't that be the Christian thing to do, right? I mean, Jesus came and said to, and John the Baptist, I mean, what was his message? Repent, right? Repent. See what you're doing, turn around and repent. Stop doing what it is that you're doing. Stop aligning yourself. See what's going on around you. See it for what it is. You know, you don't have to look very much farther than to see what is right in front of you. The Democrats would love nothing more than to get us into a war. You see what they're trying to do. They're trying to start wars in our street. They're starting wars in our streets. They wanted Bush would have go. They wanted Trump to take us into Syria and or North Korea. You see what they're doing there. They were trying to push that off. They're trying to get us involved with Russia. I mean, this stuff is not. This isn't a game. It isn't just politics. It affects everything. I mean, is war a good thing? Is going to war? I mean, we're a country that goes on these endless wars for no reason. And both parties do this. But right now we have an opportunity. We got somebody who's not doing that. And he happens to be in the Republican Party. And I don't care that he says bad words. I don't care what he said on that film or that whatever that was. You know, the Democrats, Joe Biden sat down with Cardi B. I mean, she's beyond disgusting, beyond revolting. A world full and promoted by Cardi B? As a Christian, how could you possibly go along with something like that? You can't go, Trump says bad words. Trump is mean. You know, look, don't vote Trump. I'm not saying vote Trump. I'm not. You can't vote Democrat. You can't vote Democrat if you're a Christian. Change my mind.